The seas are a very dangerous place, and every year a small number of ships and planes are lost while traveling through them. But there are some areas of open water that seem to take more lives than they should. No one knows why this is happening. This week, we go to the Great Lakes Triangle, which is one of these places. The wind coming from the middle of the bay was so cold that it made the sailors shiver as they hurried to get their ships ready to leave from his high spot. Colonel Russell stood further down the docks and watched as people in the distance rushed across the decks of the ships, putting away supplies and equipment for the long trip ahead. Even though he was wearing a heavy military greatcoat, he was still very cold. He felt sorry for the men he was watching who didn't have such protection from the weather. Winter on Lake Superior could be very rough, which may have been one reason why the people there seemed so eager to leave. Meteorologists predicted that there would be strong winds for the next week, which sounded very bad. Roussel had told the captains of the 3 ships about this the night before when he called them into his office. He strongly suggested that they wait to leave until the danger was over, but they refused. The ships were minesweepers made in Fort William for the French Navy. They were meant to get rid of German mines in the English Channel. They weren't pretty, but they were made to last, with steel frames around watertight compartments and holes in them. All 3 were named after places where the French won big battles: Sebastopol, Sorrow-Soles, and Common. The Canadian officer tightened up his coat a bit as the first minesweeper made its way out of the darkness. He knew how important these ships were to the war effort and how much their crews would want to go home after being away from their loved ones for so long. But if he could have stopped them, he would not have let them leave. Roussel was born and raised in Thunder Bay, and he joked, like many other people there, that the cold water there ran through his veins. He had seen too many ships' crews leave and never come back. He had also been to too many funerals where the caskets were filled with rocks because there was no one to put in them. There was something dark and evil about the big body of water that surrounded Ontario. It seemed to wait out of sight and attack the sailors who were crossing it when they let their guard down or did something wrong. Men from the same families had been traveling these waters for generations, and they knew how dangerous it was. The last ship swung away from its berth and blew its horn as a farewell. The colonel responded with a salute over the next few days. As he did his job, he kept worrying about the French ships and their crews. In time, Roussel's worst fears would come true, since he would never see In Common or Sorry Souls again. It is not unusual for a place where people often vanish without a trace to be called a triangle. The Great Lakes Triangle, which includes the Michigan and Mareitsburg Vortex Triangles, is often defined by 3 fixed points. The names of these mysterious areas, like Bermuda, Alaska, and Bennington, have haunting connotations. The cities of Winnipeg, Louisville, and Burlington make up the loose borders of the area. In past episodes, we've talked about how sad it was that several ships sank in the Great Lakes, but we've only scratched the surface. Most people who go missing in the area don't come back. This is especially true in the Michigan Triangle. The story of the larger Great Lakes Triangle goes all the way back to October 1892, when 3 ships went missing for unknown reasons. Then, on November 21, 1902, another ship entering a fog bank near Isle Royale reported the SS Bannockburn. The freighter, and the 20 men who went with it were never seen again. 16 years later, 3 brand new French minesweepers were on their way to the Atlantic Ocean through the Soo locks. Bad weather started, and the Sebastopol got separated from her sister ships, the In Common and the Sorry Souls. The last 2 ships and the 78 men on board never made it through the locks, and the remains of either ship have never been found. But people don't always wonder if there is something deadly and unseen at work on the Great Lakes when a ship or plane goes missing for no apparent reason. Sometimes, It's not just the fact that a ship went missing that brings up questions, but also how it was found and how it was left. The Rosa Belle, a two-masted schooner built in the 1860s to move goods between Benton Harbor and Milwaukee, is the best-known example of this. The 11 sailors who worked on her had spent most of their working lives going back and forth along the same route. In the winter of 1921, they would make their last trip. On the morning of October 31st, she was found floating upside down by a steamer coming from the direction of Milwaukee. The ship was brought back to port and the Coast Guard checked it out. The captain and his crew could not be found anywhere. At first, it was thought that she might have been in a crash with a bigger ship, but at the time, there was no bigger ship in the area and no damage was found anywhere on her. To back up this idea, another idea is that the boat might have sprung a leak and sunk again. The outside of her was closely looked at and found to be in perfect shape, with no leaks or other problems that could be seen. One of the most enduring mysteries in the area is what happened to the crew of the Roosevelt. It's as if someone or something just pulled the ship out of the water and turned it on its side. A ship called the McFarland was involved in a 16-year-old event that was even more strange. On April 28, 1937, at night, the freighter was trying to get through the locks that led to Lake Michigan. At the time, there were a lot of ice floes on the water, so the crew was extra careful to avoid a possible collision. George Donner was the captain of the McFarland. He was an experienced sailor who was very well liked by his crew. He had been on the ship's bridge for several hours, refusing to go to sleep until he was sure that any danger had passed. He was finally sure that he and his men were safe in the early hours of the morning, so he went back to his cabin to rest. Leaving the bridge, Donner asked the second mate to wake him up when they were getting close to Port Washington. A few hours later, the man found his way to the captain's cabin, but he couldn't get anyone to answer. The door was forced open and more crew members were called for. The room was empty. The men were confused when they saw that the door had been locked from the inside with a key, even though the room was empty. The captain's bed was still made, but there was no sign that he had slept in it, and his pipe was on a table nearby. There was no sign of a fight, and there was no other way out of the room. Aside from the one door, it looked like the officer had just disappeared. The loss of a Douglas DC-4 prop liner over Lake Michigan in the summer of 1950 is just as strange. The plane was Northwest Airlines Flight 2501, and it was carrying 58 people from New York City to Seattle at about 1:45 a.m. The pilot had called local flight controllers and asked for permission to drop to 2,500 feet because the weather was getting worse. This was the last time the plane could be reached by radio. After that, it didn't answer any more calls. Right away, there was a huge search on land and in the air for the plane's wreckage and the unfortunate people who were on board at the time. A few things that were thought to have come from the plane that went missing were found, but the plane's wreckage has never been found. The loss of the DC-4 and its crew is still one of the worst air disasters in American history. Author Clive Cussler, who is known for his love of nautical mysteries, continues to pay for efforts to find the missing plane. His team has now looked over more than 500 square miles of lake bed and found 10 shipwrecks that had never been seen before. However, they have found no sign of the missing airliner. Several people said they had seen strange lights hovering over the lake at the same time in the days after the event. With Flight 501, that contact was lost. 2 local police officers followed a red light they couldn't figure out that was moving fast over the water. This was one of the most disturbing things they saw. UFO sightings over the Great Lakes have been reported for decades. The most famous one happened in 1994, when hundreds of people called the police to say they saw hundreds of ghostly lights moving slowly over Lake Michigan. Two Air Force pilots who were sent to investigate a UFO over Lake Superior in 1953 are also thought to have died because of it. However, some experts say that the people who saw the UFO may have seen visitors from below the lake, not from above it. In December 2018, an Ohio father and son saw a large cylinder-shaped object hovering over Lake Erie. The object kept going into the water and coming back up again. People think that visitors to our world may have set up homes under the Earth's water and come up to study us from time to time.
For decades, U.S.
submarines have seen fast-moving, highly maneuverable ships from a place they don't know. Could it be that the Great Lakes are home to beings from another world that aren't aliens, whether they come from above or below the water? There are other ideas about what might be going on with the ships that have gone missing in the Great Lakes Triangle. Some people think that this area, like the other famous triangles around the world, is a weak point between our dimension and a number of other dimensions. It is thought that there are places where two realities can leak into each other, allowing objects and people to move between them without their knowledge. Sometimes making it through to tell the story. The wreckage that investigators are looking for is not on the lake bed, so there isn't much evidence for these disappearances. But instead, it's possible that, in a parallel reality, the unfortunate people who died in these events simply disappeared, only to show up again in a different reality. Did the fog bank that the Bannockburn went into somehow take them to a different world? As he went into his cabin, did Captain Donner tragically pass from our world into another? Divers found a mysterious circle of standing stones under Lake Michigan in 2007. These buildings are set up in a way that reminds me of the Stonehenge site in England. They are not a natural formation, so no one knows how they got there. It is thought that they may have been built as long as 10,000 years ago. Since no one knows how these stones got to the bottom of the lake, they have been the subject of all kinds of untrue theories. Some people have thought that they might be a way to get to another time or place. But the fact that they are there is another thing they have in common with similar structures in the Bermuda Triangle. A more logical explanation can be found in a strange weather pattern that has been seen in different parts of the area. A microburst is a sudden, localized weather front that can affect an area as small as a mile in diameter with rain and wind. With winds going over 100 miles per hour in these areas, anything caught in the chaos is likely to suffer serious damage because of how quickly a microburst can start and end in a small area. Storms may happen more often than we think, and any ship or plane caught in one would almost certainly be lost. People say that as the storm moves, it leaves little or no evidence of where it has been or moves the remains to a different area that has nothing to do with the storm. As a result, hundreds or even thousands of vehicles may have been lost within the Great Triangle with no clear explanation. In some cases, the wreckage of these missing ships has been found, but the people who were on board have not been found. Most likely, the terrible weather in the Great Lakes is to blame for a lot of these disappearances. Most of these things have happened during stormy weather, and in the end, the sunken ships will be found and the mysteries surrounding their disappearance will be solved. Still, some of these things can't be explained by the way things usually work. Like the other stories we've looked at from the area, these huge bodies of water seem to be connected to something intangible and hard to explain, something harsh and unforgiving. We hope that as technology keeps getting better, the brave people who have spent their time searching the beds of the Great Lakes will be able to find answers to the questions that still haven't been answered, and that the families of the missing will finally get the answers they've been looking for.